I'm Metal Matson from Super Geeky Playdate, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Check out all other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
This is episode 120 of Better Podcasting. Today, we break down your episode for its 1,000-hour tune-up and inspect all the components.
In this week's Better Podcasting download, we check in with Team Cabana on how to podcast responsibly.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we run down all the great feedback that you've sent us over the past week.
Lauren, start the show. You're the best part of it.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to episode 120 of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew, and joining me is the man in stereo, Stargate Pioneer.
Let's just get the elephant out of the way right now. I have the Rode Procaster to my right. I have the Electro Voice RE320 to my left. They are equidistant away from my mouth, both at 45 degrees angles. We're going to use both of these microphones throughout the show. You're going to be hearing one, then you're going to be hearing the other, then you're going to be hearing both. Well, no, we're not going to do that to you. We're not going to show both, but I'm recording both microphones the entire time, and this is going to be the final shootout between the Rode and the Electro Voice RE320. Which microphone will I be using next week? You'll have to tune in to find out.
Hint, it's the PR40. No, it's not. This week, we are here back with another episode of Better Podcasting, and in a few minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about some basic podcasting components. But before we get there, we just want to remind you that we do like to hear from you, the listener. We are always looking to solicit a few pieces of conversation from you, one of which is how you saved your podcast. If you've ever had something go wrong with your podcast and you've saved your podcast, we want to know, what did you do? Please send us a video or an audio clip. You can go ahead and contact us through any of the ways, including tweeting us at BetterPod, heading on over to facebook.com/betterpodcasting or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com and let us know how have you saved your podcast. The reason we like to do this is because it really helps us all learn together. We like to make a community here on Better Podcasting. So please do tell us how have you saved it, and maybe you can help somebody else who's having troubles with their show.
I always loved how I save my podcast story, especially if it's me that hasn't had to go through the problems of saving my podcast. But yeah, in the past couple of months, I've had to do a few things to save my podcast, one of which was to go to backup tracks because I had a co-host that was trying out some new gear, and unfortunately, the recording got all messed up, so I had to go some backup tracks. Hey, it happens. You just deal with it and you move on.
So please do get in touch with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. That's right, we're talking to you. Let's move into our main topic. We've talked before about how some podcasts elect to have certain things such as introductions, outros, stingers, bumps, all this other stuff. But have you considered why people use these? And if you use them, have you thought about why you use them in your show? What makes them successful? What makes them really tick?
Like actually tick in the audio? Is that what you're talking about? Because that would generally be bad. A lot of people hate the mouth clicks and ticks. And
no,
stuff.
I was talking about the tick that burrows into you. Anyways, continue.
Ew, you're going to go all Canadian North Woods on us. They have Lyme disease. That's not fun. Anyway, what he's talking about is if the components of your podcast actually work. But before we continue, let's just say straight ahead that you don't have to have any of these that we're talking about. It's your show. There are many podcasts which just start talking straight away and don't use any produced elements at all. And personally, we don't recommend this approach because some people like it, but we don't. Stephen and I, actually prefer a professional sounding approach to a podcast because it shows that you care. And as we've mentioned before, with more mainstream media getting into podcasting, we think that you will find that there will be more people who expect to hear this sort of approach as they find podcasting through some of these mainstream organizations and these really professional produced podcasts, whether it's a crime related podcast or a story related podcast or an NPR related podcast. That's your competition out there for those that are just getting into the pod sphere right now and trying to find a podcast to listen to.
So today we want to talk about some of these components if you do elect, of course, to do these. Now, let's start off with one that we briefly spoke about last week, but we want to expand a little bit on, is the introduction. You've got to decide with your show, how are you going to start it? Are you going to make yourself a produced intro, or are you going to do something like a cold opening? Now, these are decisions that you have to make, and for every show, it's going to be a little bit different. Some people just use at the start of the show something like an out-of-context clip from the episode, or other people use a tease. A tease is a great example on a way to start off your show. Now, if you do a tease, it's a really good idea to give enough information that you hook the listener, but not enough that you give away the farm. We don't want to sit there and tell them exactly what they need to know right up front. You want to give them a reason to keep listening to find out said information. It really makes them listen. Now, if you do opt to do an introduction, it's important that this introduction offers value to your listener. Now, what we mean by that is a 3-minute compilation of audio clips from your show doesn't necessarily add value. All it's doing is showing highlights from the past. However, a 1-minute intro that talks a little bit about what your show is, maybe has a couple of clips in it, small ones, can help set the tone of your show. There's a big difference. Just a mashup of clips is, in my opinion, a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, and when you're building this, think about future-proofing. Is there something that you can do in order to shake it up occasionally while maintaining consistency? One thing that you can do is, if you do get a professionally produced intro, is to make sure that the audio is separate from anything else, like the music overlays or clip overlays or whatever. So, for example, with ours here on Better Podcasting, we do tease at the start of the show, and we have built music to roll into the intro, and that has all been done separately. And this allows us to change our beginning each week, but keep that familiarity so the listener knows that they are getting into an episode of Better Podcasting.
And also think about how creative you can be with this. Like SP has an example on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., right?
Yeah, in the past, I had to do the cold intro. I started to do a cold intro, and I had to do it offline. First of all, it was because we'd forgotten to put them in the show notes. But after a couple of months, me forgetting, we actually threw them into the show notes, and we started doing them. It was a little bit of a learning curve. Not only was it just me, but it was my co-host that had to learn how to do a cold opening to give information and yet not give everything away, not talk about the entire episode that we were about to do. So it is a learning curve. You could do it both ways. You could do it after in post production, and you can do it live or while you're recording just to get it out of the way.
Now, SP and I both prefer a more professional style approach to the opening. We think that this helps set a good tone to your listener. Someone popping into your podcast for the first time, they're going to be met with something that sounds a little bit more professional. For me personally, I've sampled some shows and their introduction sounds like it should be a little bit longer. So they go the extreme. They take a very they make it kind of an odd intro because it's so short and it sounds like it should keep going. And for me, I'm almost like, well, just don't do any at all, because it mismatches with the rest of their show. It's almost a little bit distracting in that sense. But I appreciate those who have a little bit longer of an intro, but it's a little bit more professional. So that's my personal taste. I also find that it can be a little bit jarring if you end up in a situation that you have an intro that completely mismatches the rest of your show. It sounds like it's going to sound one way. You're going to be this high production, super show, and then you come in and there are a couple of people recording on your iPhone in the bathroom. So that can also be jarring.
It could be anything from a cold opening to the intro or both before you get to the rest of your recording. And also make sure that you keep the audio levels the same throughout in your post-production. And as far as the intro goes, some TV shows, if you watch TV, you have noticed as a show goes on, a lot of times they shorten their intro. And I don't like that. And I don't like it when podcasts do it either, but that's just me. To me, the intro is part of the experience. It gets me into the mood for the show. One of the reasons TV shows do it is to actually gain more screen time with their show, because they're only allowed to, that half an hour, that hour or whatever. With a podcast, you have as long as you want. So that just doesn't make any sense to me. And remember, your show can be as long or as short as you want it, just as long as it's not boring your listener. You want to make sure that you keep delivering that valuable content along the way. So that should be your barometer. And also, I like the feel of getting into the show and doing creative things. I mean, we do it here on Better Podcasting with our intro, but TV shows, if you're our age, you might have watched a couple of shows called The Simpsons or Futurama. Look, you could shake up intro elements just like those TV shows do on a per episode basis, but still keep the same feel all along. Just remember that. It's a little bit more work, but it is definitely more of a value to your listener.
Absolutely. Also, make sure to consider that adding anything at the front of your show does delay your content. This is something that some listeners will skip. So if you are going to put something in the front of your show, make sure that it's not 100% critical to listen to your show, because there's going to be a large amount of people who do skip over that front part.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, if it's consistent, if you put valuable content elements into your intro, then your listener is going to learn that over time, and they're going to learn not to skip. But if you're trying to hook that intro listener, that new listener for the first time, you might consider not putting absolutely the most critical piece of your content in that first intro space. And what's the most effective structure for your show after the introduction, right? Not all shows work the same way. For example, some shows, such as a comedy show, may need a little bit of an audience warm-up. I've been to a live taping of a sit-down show, and I think Steven has as well. As Steven says, fun fact, right? There are often warm-up comedians before the taping of late night shows and sitcoms and that sort of stuff. And this is to keep the crowd entertained and, more importantly, warm them up so that when the real funny stuff happens while they're taping, they can get that great audience reaction on tape.
So if you are a more comedy show, you might need to do that warm-up before you dive in. So your component structure might be a little bit different. Another example would be if you're a news show, you probably want to get to the news sooner than later. If people are coming to listen to the news, they probably don't want to hear 5 minutes of gab before you get there. They want the news. So you're probably going to want to bring that main content right to the forefront. You want to try to have it as early as possible, but every show will vary to a degree. If you are going to inject something towards the start of the show, it's a good idea to reference to that main topic at hand. For example, you might say, today we're going to talk about all of the different fried chicken restaurants around town. But before we get there, we just want to remind you that we're always looking for your fried chicken reviews. And today we've got a review that we want to play from a C. Sanders. So that would be teasing the main topic as you get that little bit of feedback in from your listener before you jump in from C. Sanders.
Steven, you know, the C in Colonel, it stands for Colonel. That's not a front name. That's not a first name. It's a C. Colonel. Do you know Colonel Sanders' real first name?
Oh, it's K for Colonel. I got you now.
No, that's not. Never mind. Listener, if you know Colonel Sanders' first name, please tweet it to Stephen, and that's at Stephen Jondrew on Twitter, and make sure he knows that the Colonel has a first name.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
You could also take a look, by the way, to see if your structure is working by consulting the Apple Podcast statistics and seeing when people are listening. Everybody's in Apple Podcasts. I mean, if you have a podcast, odds are it's in Apple Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts now gives you statistics from listeners that are listening through iOS 11 or higher on a mobile device that is Apple owned. So that gives you a good indicator. So these statistics will work for you, and especially if your audience is large enough and it's statistically relevant, meaning it's not like 2 listeners, it's more like 200 or 2,000. You can see when people are dropping in mass. And then you could also solicit some feedback and ask some listeners what they don't like in your show if you don't want to just use the Apple statistics. So if somebody emails you a short email, it could be a good topic to build that connection with them. And remember that sometimes where you start isn't always the best place to end. You may have to switch through your podcast run, and it's just the name of the game. I talked about a story last week or the week before about how I switched Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast. We used to do the news first, and then we swapped it out. So we're actually doing the main topic first and then doing the news later. So that's just an example. You might have to swap segments around. You might have to actually act segments or bring new ones in. A show is constantly evolving, and you should be keen on what works and try to diminish what doesn't work along the way. So just remember, nothing's set in stone along the way. And also, if you put something juicy, but just not the focal point of your show towards the end, you can encourage people to keep listening all the way through your show. And by putting your less important content in between important content, it can also sound more smooth to a listener. So you're not just like all big bang content up front and then it just slides off into nowhere. You're going to drop off listeners along the way. But if you hit people with really great content and then crescendo down a little bit and then go back up to really great content and back and forth, that could work too. So just keep that in mind as you are creating your episode. So,
by the way, SP hits me all the time. So he's hit people with good content. SP hits me.
I thought that you had received a restraining order from mentioning that on any future creative content that we did together.
Send it to your lawyer. But speaking of structure and components and things like that, if your podcast is compartmentalized, how are you getting there? Are you simply moving on to the next part of your topic or your discussion? Or are you going to use something to aid you, like a stinger or a bump? There's pros and cons to both of these. If you're able to seamlessly transition through your different blocks of information, it might encourage people to keep listening because they're sitting there and they're hearing just essentially a run-on sentence, so to speak. You're just flowing into the next thing. But if you end up use stingers, on the other hand, or bumps, it's almost a little bit of an invitation for people to drop off because they know this is the end of this topic that we're talking about now. Now we're moving on to the next. So there are pros and cons to both. But when you're in a situation where you are moving to something that is a bit of a left turn, the stingers and the bumps can almost have the opposite effect. They can help. If you're talking about topic A, and now all of a sudden you're going to start talking about topic F, if you just do that without any form of transition or any form of natural segue, it might sound a little bit jarring to the listener. So when you do insert that bump or that transition, it helps because now it's an audio clue to the listener that, oh, okay, we're moving on and I need to have a different frame of mind in this next section.
Fun fact, Stephen actually dual uses the stingers and bumps to play off his co-hosts on various podcasts that he produces. So yeah, as a producer, this actually can be a little more than a hint that we need to move on and talk about something else because you don't want to spend days and days and days in the editing bay. One of the podcasts that's part of the GonnaGeek.com network is Digital Soup, and I think they do a great job of segueing just verbally without bumps from place to place. They actually have bumps too, but they do a lot of segueing themselves. And every once in a while, you have one host that, whoa, wait, I'm not done yet, and they call it a seg block. So they seg block each other all the time, not intentionally, maybe some intentionally, but it's a little fun thing that they do on their podcast. It's not what I would recommend for all podcasts, but this is an example of something that works for them. And if you play around with stuff, maybe it will work for you as well.
Keep in mind, by the way, that you can use these segments to help change the tone as well of the show. If you're going into somewhere in your episode that's a little bit different, you can use these to help shift the tone. I actually do that a bit with the GonnaGeek.com show. When we go from talking about news and we go into a segment that's maybe a little bit more fun, for example, one of the games we might do, I try to have those stingers or those intros to be a little bit more fun and a little bit more upbeat, because it's a bit of a clue to the listener. Okay, we're going a little bit more of a loose format. So they do work both ways. And that is something that you can really use those to help aid along the tone of your show as well.
Yeah, and as we were saying, you can use just a simple piece of music, or you can use something produced. I would say bumpers and stingers is what they're called if you're looking for them in the music libraries. About 8 seconds or less is really what you're looking at for like a true stinger or a bumper. But if you want something a little bit more produced, like with verbal talking over it, you might want something a little bit longer, something that's maybe 20 or 30 seconds in addition to what's there. So if you're looking at specific music to use or sound effects, that's kind of a length that you're looking at. I have seen stuff as small as like 3 seconds, but if you get shorter than 3 seconds, it's just really jarring and like boom, like a bass drum or something like that. They're like, okay.
Like that? That would be perfect, right?
I think it needs to be a little bit longer there, Steven.
That was me playing you off, by the way.
Right. Well, that's an example of a really short bump, and it needs to be just a little bit longer. In my opinion, now, whatever works for you works for you. And then you can also use a set of feedback or like an audio clip as you move from segment to segment or section to section. You can break things up that way as well. So this is just various different things that you can use. Now on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., I break up all of my segments with some sort of a bump, and it varies from show to show which bumps I use. I generally have bumps that I use in specific places, but sometimes I change them up, and I would like to actually change them up more than I do. It's just I don't have a lot of time to go research bumps that would fit those areas and stuff like that. So when I do, I am very much happy that I can go in and actually update and refresh those bumps. But on Starling Tribune, there's only one bump, and that's to announce the news. That's it. And it's there for a sound effect, really, of we're starting the news. Just because the segment that it's coming from and the segment that it's going to are so different, I want to make sure there's a differentiation to the listener of what we were talking about and what we're going to be talking about.
Now, another component that you might consider with your show is promotions or cross-promotion of some form. Now, whether you're part of a network or if you've got multiple shows that you do, a lot of time podcasters want to integrate some form of promotion into their show. There's pros and cons of where to place this. For example, having a promo read up front can be good from a promotion stance because you probably have the listener there before they've dropped off. However, it's bad because it also delays your content. So you kind of got to weigh the pros and the cons and what it is. You have to find the right show or the right fit for your show. And one area that we found works really well is before you move into another section. And if you're going to play a bump, it's again a bit of an opportunity there because you're about to switch the tone of your show. So a lot of times that works really well to fit it in there. Every show is unique, but it's important that you consider where exactly to add this and remember that your listener is there for you. So they're here to listen to the show you're on now, not the show you do another day. But keep in mind on the flip side that the listener might not know about that other show unless you tell them. So that's why the right fit matters.
On the Gonna Geek Network, there's a variety of different ways that the other podcasts on the network cross-promote other podcasts. First of all, we have a pre-roll, which you hear at the beginning of every Better Podcasting, which has different hosts from different shows. I've never played my own intro on my own show. I might do an intro for another show that I'm doing, a pre-roll for another show that I'm doing, but I never do it for the show that I'm on, unless I have a co-host that is gone for that week. I might actually insert their bump there, but really the pre-roll is meant for cross promotion. And then within the show itself, we have shows that cross promote very different ways. We have shows that wait to the end and promote like 3 other shows. We have shows that wait to the end of a segment to promote a show. We have shows that literally take actual audio clips from other shows and they insert it into their show and play off of it in an interaction between the shows. That's always fun. And then we have shows that will play clips and say, hey, look, I was listening to this. This was really fun without any interaction between the shows. So as an example, always get permission to play a clip of another show, even if you're on the same network, unless you have network rules that says any clip is a good, fair game for another show. We don't have that at Gonna Geek.
No. Another component you might be thinking about is your ending and your outro. Do you want to have an ending on your show? You don't necessarily have to have one, but a lot of people find that it does benefit because an ending can serve as a way to cap off your show on a positive tone. For example, even if your listener doesn't regularly check out the ending, the odds are that your listener has heard it somewhere along their journey. Maybe it was the first time they listened, or maybe it was just that time that they couldn't stop and skip to the podcast because they had a cop parked right next to them at the traffic light, so they couldn't pull out their phone. Somewhere they probably heard your ending, and that means that they probably heard what you had to say in that ending. This can at least leave it on a professional note as well. If you've got a produced ending that sounds good, it also can be beneficial for that new listener that we spoke about last week on the episode. And it can help them find you elsewhere if you reference your social media or something like that. It also can be good for credits or for possible legal reasons, like if there was a copyright that you had to mention with your music. For example, Incompetech. If you've ever downloaded audio from Incompetech, I certainly hope that you credit that because it is licensed under crediting. And also, if you're part of a bigger organization where you have to have some form of legal disclaimer in there that it is a part of a certain corporation. So there really can be a lot of benefits to having an ending. Our opinion is one of the best ways as a hobby podcaster you can use it is to promote your other content or your other reach. So like I said, your social media, or if you have a main website, or maybe that's a great time to talk about if you are part of a certain network or you have a group of podcasts that you do.
Keep in mind that generally speaking, a lot of other people will turn off the outro when it starts playing, but some keep listening so that their podcatcher, automatically marks the episode as completed and listened to. I found that in most of the podcatchers I have, if I get to a certain point in the episode, like 5 minutes later, it will mark that episode as completely played. So just watch out for that if you want to listen to those final few minutes yourself as a listener. But as a producer, just keep in mind that a lot of people might not get to that last few minutes. But you can also keep some exciting content after the outro or post outro. For example, outtakes. It is great bonus material. I add in outtakes whenever I can, which is almost every episode to Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. I used to do it for Voices of Defiance and Starling Tribune as well. But just a little insight, if you haven't picked this one up already, Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode 228, the outtakes are hilarious. So go check that out. Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode number 228 if you want to hear a version of outtakes. And Stephen, you also did stuff with your old comic book show, The Fembo Buzz.
Yeah, we once actually ran a contest that had a little clip post credits. And it was quite impressive how many people that we got that did check it out right away. Now, some of those people did say they noticed the longer length, but it was fairly short. So absolutely, some people do listen to it. But there you go. Those are your podcast basic components. considerations. We wanted to go through and run through some of those, give you your biannual tune-up. Is that a thing? Why not? So if you got suggestions about managing your basic podcast components, or things that you found worked really well for you, or things that maybe didn't work so hot, please get in touch with us. You can get in touch with us through a variety of different ways. You can, as again, reach us at facebook.com/betterpodcasting, or you know what? Head on over to www.betterpodcasting.com and comment over there. You can just comment wherever, and SP will see it. He has a very, very secret algorithm that finds him everywhere.
Yeah, and I even find myself in places that I don't want to.
That's just called forgetting your mind as you get old.
Okay. So when I took the walk the other day for 2 miles and it turned out to be 10 miles, that's a bad thing?
This is the part where I play you off.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
All right. This is a very, very interesting thing that we found coming our way. We had it come our way actually via the Pod to Pod newsletter. If you've not checked that out before, you can subscribe to that. There's some good podcast content that comes out of the Pod to Pod newsletter. And one of these things was by Team Cabana, and they posted the 5 rules for podcasting responsibly. And we wanted to quickly run through those rules that they posted and give a bit of our take. And hopefully this will also entice you to subscribe to that Pod to Pod newsletter. There is a lot of really good content that comes out of it.
Yeah, a lot of it is business related, but every once in a while there's a lot of hobby stuff. And this week there happened to be, and I just picked one of the articles that they had posted in there and threw it in the show notes. And then you can find this story on Medium. It was posted, as Steven said, by Team Cabana. And there's really 6. I mean, they say 5, but there's really 6. And why do I say 6? Because in the intro paragraph, they say compelling content. You've already got your compelling content. Well, I think that is actually the first thing, so we'll just call it 6, right, Steven? 6.
I'm with 6. I'm good for 6.
Okay, 6 things. The first one is compelling content. The next one is schedule like a boss. So you have compelling content already. The next thing that you should do is actually schedule or be consistent with your releases so you can start building that audience or growing your audience if you already have one. And this is something that we would recommend as a hobby podcaster, because generally hobby podcaster, you're getting less than 500 downloads or less, probably maybe 2,000 downloads or less. And if you want to grow that audience beyond the downloads that you're getting, consistent content is definitely a way to do that. Another way that they say to podcast responsibility is get high quality audio. And when I saw high quality audio, I immediately went to the water boy. High quality H2O.
Wow.
You ever see that, Steven? Really? No?
I did, but I don't want to think about it. But yes, high quality audio. Obviously, this is considering the basics. You want to make sure that you're following good practices for recording. Start at the source. Are you using a good microphone? Are you using technology that's going to allow higher quality? Mics do break, and sometimes Skype decides not to cooperate. You have an alternative that's going to help you continue to maintain that high quality. Number 3, this one here I thought came out of left field when I was reading this list, was own your feed. Choosing to host your show on a dedicated platform or using your own URL. If you are going to go with a third-party service, make sure that you can take your RSS feed if you do end up growing or leaving. So there's a variety of different ways that you can do that. I don't want to dive down the rabbit hole of, quote, what is owning your own feed. I think there's some very, very strong opinions on what that is. We talked in episode 65 a little bit about that. So definitely making sure, I want to personally amend this one a little bit, making sure that you can redirect it is the most important part of that.
Yeah, because if you do host with Libsyn, which I think is a legitimate way to do it, or Podbean, I think that maybe perhaps some people could think that you don't own your own feed, but as long as you can redirect it, it's as good as owning your own feed. So semantics are there. And this is a discussion. Go back to episode number 65 before I completely get Steven angry. And we don't want Steven angry because he is a robot and he might explode. The next thing to podcast responsibly is to edit mindfully. And here's where I'm going to insert some hobby podcasters mentality here. So they're saying, cut all of the sidebar, cut all of the talk in between the hosts, and just get that good content out when you edit mindfully. I'm going to say, as a hobby podcaster, that might not necessarily be a cut and dry thing. You might want the listener to get to know you, to build a personal relationship with you. So you might want to keep some of that sidebar conversations, as it says in the article, in your podcast, just to sound more personable, to sound more human to the person on the other end. So this, to me, kind of stinks of on entrepreneurial, business-minded podcast advice, which is completely relevant. I mean, you do want to edit your show, but you don't want to take out the humanity from the show, especially as a hobby podcaster. Steven, would you agree with that?
I agree. I think it all boils down to the style of the show. I think there is definitely a lot of types of shows out there that if they were all business, people wouldn't like them. If you look at some of the successful podcasts out there that are news and whatnot, especially if you look at the tech news, a lot of the successful ones have an element of humanity in them, because people don't want to just hear Bill, the news anchor, reading the news. They want to hear something with a little bit more personality. So I think that it depends on the show. But yeah, those business podcasts, I think that it makes a difference if you just stay on point. The other counter to that I will say is over editing is, in my opinion, worse. So there are people who have just started editing, and what's the first thing they do? They truncate all silence. Well, it sounds really, really stupid when there's just somebody talking like this and there's no gaps at all, because they're just going over and over because they've removed all of the silence. It makes no sense. It sounds fast. It doesn't sound natural. As well, the people who go to remove a breath but don't catch it all, so you end up with this big breath that is just cut off, or somebody that starts to say something, or they start to say and then it's obviously removed. I think that you need to edit mindfully, as they say, but make sure that you're not over editing, that it's obvious to the listener.
I got a personal story about that. So, Steven, I used to listen to this show that got me into podcasting. You're aware of it, Galactic Water Cooler. And I was once talking to the guys. So, what's the worst you've ever edited the show? And one of the hosts told me, we actually counted one time. We went 22 minutes without taking a breath. Now, they went from host to host, but there wasn't a breath actually in the show for 22 minutes. And I think after that, they got a lot more natural of it. 22 minutes without taking. I'm like, holy crap. And I actually listened to that show and didn't notice at the time. I wasn't a producer, but after the fact, yeah, I can actually tell that. And the last one on the list here is to check in with your fans. And largely, this is trying to grow your audience. And they understand, Team Cabana understands, that podcast growth really happens by word of mouth. So they want to make sure that you grow that relationship with your fans, with your listeners, and that you respond to them, you reach out to them, that sort of thing. I will say that that's largely true, but I wouldn't treat them as a commodity. I would treat them as relationships. And oftentimes you have to build relationships one at a time, and it's a lot more work than you might think. Now, as your audience grows, you have to scale that a little bit, but you still need to keep that personal relationship with your fans, and not just a, hey guys, you're on the stage in front of the 50,000 fans sort of thing, and you can't talk to anybody individually. Podcast is an individual game. You're more than likely talking, if you have 200 downloads, you're more than likely talking to 200 different individuals inside their heads in earbuds or through their car speakers. So it's just you with a conversation with them, and it's not you in a conversation with 50,000 people at once. It is a different sort of conversation to have.
So there you go. That is their list of stuff. If you want to check that out yourself, you can go ahead and head on over to www.geeks.link/5rules. That's geeks.link/5rules. You can use a 5, or you can spell out 5 if you feel like being a little liberal with your characters. So that's geeks.link/5rules. Check that out. And also, we want to know, what do you think about these rules? Please let us know, because honestly, rules are sometimes meant to be broken. I said that.
There are no rules in podcasting. You can do whatever you want. There are things that you could do better than other things, but there are no rules in podcasting.
That's true, which is why before we get to our Better Podback, you're going to hear 10 minutes of Metallica songs. For all you Metallica fans, I'm sorry, we weren't going to do it. This week in the Better Podback, we had a plethora of feedback come our direction. We had a tweet from Sunshine and Power Cuts at SunPowerPod saying, thank you so much for featuring the first 3 Sunshine Summit 2018 guests in the recommended listening segment of ODO 94. SP, what was that in a reference to?
She was actually replying to the Twitter handle at OddDadOut, and OddDadOut in Adam Higgins in his 94th episode. Actually, he's getting ready to participate in the Sunshine Summit himself. And basically what he did is he listened to all of the other shows that are going to be participating, and he was highlighting them in his segments. It's been actually very interesting to listen to. Now, I have to warn you, it is not suitable for work, but both Stephen and I did listen to the section on Better Podcasting in Odd Dad Out episode 94, and we were both floored. I was just amazed. I listened to it a couple of times, and then I messaged Steven and I said, dude, you got to check this out. And I didn't hear from him for like 15 minutes. Then all of a sudden he's like, wow, that was powerful. So to Adam, I have to say that was amazing. Thank you very much. I don't think either of us had heard any sort of audio praise like that about Better Podcasting since we've started. And this is episode number 120. We've been doing this more than 2 years. Thank you very much, Adam. Really appreciate that. And oh, by the way, we are participating in Sunshine Summit 2018. It'll be 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, March the 9th, so you can check us out. We will tweet the link, but Heather, who is running this, is actually running it on YouTube and just the way we broadcast Better Podcasting. So you'll be able to catch us there on March the 9th. And I'm just guessing we haven't actually done any pre-coordination yet on this, on the technological end, but I'm guessing if you check out geeks.live at 7:30 p.m. Friday, March the 9th, you're probably going to see it broadcast there.
And by the way, your feedback was awesome. I genuinely mean that. It was fantastic. It was very, very, very humbling. I actually don't know that I've had a piece of feedback that strong in the nearly 10 years that I've been podcasting. So thank you very much for that. And the bonus part of all of that there is that anytime anybody encourages SP and I to continue taking shots at each other, the better.
And that's actually one of the things he talked about, is that we bust each other's you-know-what.
Absolutely.
So you can catch that at 47 minutes, 25 seconds into his episode, but I would encourage you to listen to the entire episode. And in fact, if you stay after the credits, we'll play it for you. It's actually a couple minutes long, so just hang on. We'll get to it. It's our first attempt at a post-credit scene.
Ooh, usually those are reserved for my personal collection. We also had Podcastage tweet us saying, another great episode this week. I agree with the main advice here, which is, quote, remember any episode can be someone's first impression of your content, end quote. I need to get better at being okay missing an episode.
And it is okay to miss an episode every once in a while, especially if life gets in the way. And especially as a hobby podcaster, if you do not have any financial commitments to other businesses or advertisers or anything like that, then feel free to take a week off if you need to. Just get right back on that horse and get back into podcasting as soon as you can. You're going to need it. We also had a tweet, by the way, from Aurelia Pod. Remember Aurelia Pod, Stephen?
Aurelia Pod. Say it with me. Aurelia Pod.
It's actually with an E first, not an A, as we've been saying it, but that's what he said. Aurelia Pod, or Aurelia Pod.
Now you just went and ruined it. Thanks, SP.
Anyway, Aurelia Pod tweeted us and said, collector's items, you say? Referring to the Knox podcasting microphone that we talked about last week. I wonder what the going rate for 5 of them is. Yes, Aurelia Pod picked up 5 Knox podcasting microphones. You can't get them anywhere. They are a collector's item right now. You probably never see another one again unless you want to get it from a third-party seller. So that was a deal that lasted a little less than a year, and you could get one for $40, and now they're gone. So just stay tuned for when the next Samsung Q2U or Audio-Technica AT2005 or Audio-Technica ATR 2100 sale is, and you can pick up one of those for somewhere between $35 and $45. So stay tuned for our social media, because we usually produce or announce when those deals happen and we notice them. Another thing that we like to do at Better Podcasting is post Twitter polls, which are incredibly difficult because you only get 4 choices, and each choice is like, I don't know, Stephen, what, 7 characters long?
I think that it's actually 2. You get 2 characters for the entire tweet, and that's all 4 options on the polls.
Indeed. So you posted this poll, Stephen. I'm going to call you out. And it says, and you posted it in the middle of the day. You gave our audience just, I think it was 3 minutes, 27 seconds.
It was 5 hours. I gave them
5 hours? Okay,
solid
5 hours.
hours in the middle of a workday, okay? I was working, by the way. I did this on my break.
Oh, a break? You sure it was a break? Oh, he's winking, folks. He's winking. Okay. So the tweet said, if you use stingers, bumps, transitions between sections of your podcast, how long are they? And 1 was 0 to 5 seconds. 1 was 6 to 15 seconds. 1 answer was 16 to 30 seconds. And 1 was over 30 seconds. And we had some responses. 60% of them actually were between 0 and 5 seconds. And 40% of our responses were between 6 and 15 seconds. So yeah, somewhere between, as I was saying before, 3 seconds, 8 seconds, somewhere along there. That's all the longer that you want a bump to be, not a 5-minute song.
What? Oh,
No,
there's my entire podcast. Also, we had Diami Paloki say we use them occasionally and they last about 3 seconds. So that was in reference to the bumps.
And also, Geekville Radio tweeted us back and said, usually a few seconds, it's a transition, not a commercial spot. Remember that, not a commercial spot. Although some podcasts use commercial spots in those positions. So there you go.
Which takes us to our first ever sponsor of Better Podcasting, Stargate Pioneers, House of Microphones. If you don't record with 2 microphones, you're not doing it right.
I don't think you've ever done a Better Podcasting with 2 microphones. Have you done a Better Podcasting with 2 microphones?
I don't think. Did I do the 7? I might have done the 7B and BP40. I think I did the 7B and BP40 simultaneously.
Okay.
I think.
Because this is at least my second time of using 2 microphones simultaneously. So I think I'm getting to be a pro at this. And honestly, I don't want to. I just want to use 1 microphone. But this is for your benefit, folks. I am suffering for you to go through a choice between the microphones. Hey, we got an email, Stephen. I think you need to read it.
We did.
Want me to?
We got an email from loyal listener Johnny Pennington. Loyal listener Johnny Pennington said the following. He said, sorry, Stephen, but I have to concur with SP and Better Podcasting number 119 that it is pronounced, quote, the, end quote, Dave Jackson, not, quote, the, end quote, Dave Jackson. However, you do have it over SP in your pronunciation of Behringer. Behringer, as you pronounce it, is correct. Behringer, not Behringer, as SP pronounces it. Now, I do understand that SP is not a fan of the aforementioned brand, and that might subconsciously be the reason for him mispronouncing it. Certainly an unknown to us mortals. If, however, all this is thought to be a he said, she said versus thing, I have provided a link to an official Behringer commercial, and that correctly states their name, and it is incredibly funny and entertaining at the same time. A must-see. Gosh, that sounds exactly like Better Podcasting. Informative and entertaining at the same time. What a concept, Johnny Pennington. Okay, so this link that he sent, by the way, it is an incredible commercial. It's horrible. There's some amazingly bad ADR in it. It's right up to the Behringer quality that you expect. So absolutely, if you want to check this out, it's geeks.link/Behringer. That's geeks.link/Behringer. You're going to have to figure out how to spell it out. Or Behringer if you prefer, but they do definitely say Behringer in there. And moral of this story is, while I've had great success with Behringer products, I do not believe that they would withstand a gunshot. So there you go. Check that out at geeks.link/Behringer. As for the versus the, my response to that is go to www.geeks.link/the. That's geeks.link/the. And you can see a link from English Club that says, normally we pronounce the with a short sound, but when the comes before a vowel, we pronounce it as a long the. To which they give an example of all sorts of vowels, like we would write it as the apple, but we would say the apple. Or we would write it as the egg, and we would say it as the egg. Or we would write it as the ice cream, but we would pronounce it as the ice cream. So you can check that out. And last time I checked, D is not a vowel.
All I got to say, Stephen, is the is more correctly with the pronunciation, not only before Dave Jackson, but before you talk about anything that is the sole one, right? So the is the correct pronunciation for all said things, including in front of Dave Jackson, the Dave Jackson. Dave, how you doing, buddy? I know you're listening to this.
So thank you very much, Johnny, for your email. And seriously, a moral of this story is www.geeks.link/Behringer. You will wish you had your 2 minutes of your life back, but at the same time, be weirdly satisfied that you watch it. It is horrendous.
We also had a comment over on our YouTube channel on our last episode. Heather Welsh, who's running the Sunshine Summit 2018, said, great episode as usual. I did get carried away after getting into the flow of weekly recordings, but I think my podcast improved when I went back to including a short intro to outline what people can expect. I haven't made a pre-roll, so I can add or tweak it to the specific episode, but it has a few main points which remain the same. I have seen questions in groups about whether or not to reference other episodes, and I think it is a good idea with a link in the show notes to be able to find a related episode. Thank you for the shout out for the Sunshine Summit 2018. Have we mentioned that enough in this episode yet, Stephen?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. The what?
The Sunshine Summit 2018, and mention for Adam's feature of the guest. I can't wait to start with Sunshine Summit with you guys.
Awesome. So there you go. That's going to take us towards the end of the show. Before we wrap up, we want to remind you that we have a live stream when we record this. It's usually on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 5 p.m. Pacific Time at www.geeks.live. We had quite a few chat members come by today, including Emily Prokop, Seth Zillman, Bangs Naughty Bits, Roy Brady, and Mike Howard, a.k.a. JPEG2Raw-Mike. And we had quite an interesting conversation tonight. If you've never checked out the live stream, sometimes the chat room goes a whole other direction. For example, we had Mike asking, is it Bob Sanders in relation to Colonel Sanders? We had Emily say Colonel Sanders wasn't even in the military. And then she fell into the Google rabbit hole. We had Roy Brady ask the question, where's a good place to get bumpers, to which a bunch of places were referenced, including the Google Music Library, Pond 5, Audio Jungle, Incompetech. As well, I did put out the suggestion, the guy who plays the banjo behind Arby's. So you could check him out there. And Roy then said he loves a good Reuben sandwich. And when you go to Arby's, you should get a Reuben.
He also said he was on his way, so I don't know if the banjo player behind Arby's by the dumpster is still available for music for your podcast.
Now, occasionally the chat room does stay on topic, and Emily actually put a nice little nugget in there, which was that she has some clients who sometimes want all of the the crutch words removed, and sometimes she does end up leaving them in there so that they do sound more natural sounding. So there you go. From a professional editor, that sometimes leaving them in does help make it sound a little bit more natural. And one of the ways that I've actually seen that apply is when someone uses a crutch word, which is actually acting as a transition in tone. If you remove that crutch word, it sounds really, really weird when someone's talking like this and then like this. It doesn't sound right. So sometimes you have to use it as the transition in tone and pace.
I was doing that last night on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., as a matter of fact. I wanted to take out a word and I couldn't. I was like, oh, dang you. Oh, well, it's what it is.
Absolutely. So there you go. And again, if you have any questions or you got any suggestions, please do get in touch with us through any of the ways. Just head on over to betterpodcasting.com. And while you're there, check out the Gonna Geek Network. The Gonna Geek Network is the home of better podcasting, where we are proud to have many different podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network. Lots of different geeky content, and you should definitely check that out at gonnageeknetwork.com, including episode 27 of Gallifrey Public Radio. And in episode 27, longtime GPR companion Julie joins in studio to discuss the composers and compositions that have added so much to the emotional impact of Doctor Who since its inception. So check that out at gonnageeknetwork.com. But for episode number 120 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen John Drew. I started playing the outro, which means I'm playing off SP.
And I'm SP saying, can you tell which microphone I'm using now? How about now? How about now? Okay, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at gonnageeknetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.
Coming up next, speaking of friendships, at 7:30 Eastern on Friday the 9th, we have Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer from Better Podcasting. And I have heard of this show. I have heard of Stargate Pioneer from the very early days, nearly 3 years ago when I got into podcasting and I started listening to the Audacity to Podcast and the School of Podcasting and Podcasters Roundtable and the New Media Show. All these podcaster shows, like these industry podcaster shows. And in every chat room and every live show, they say Stargate Pioneer. It's like, oh yeah, SP is here. I'm like, and yeah, it's Better Podcasting. And Heather had mentioned that was kind of one of her go-to podcasts about podcasting. And again, I heard Stargate Pioneer all over the place, but I never listened to a show because I already listened to so many other podcasts about podcasting. I was like, I don't need another one. But again, wanting to be fair to these segments, like I'm going to listen to these shows. So I started listening to Better Podcasting the other day. And not only was I fortunate just because, fate, I happened to listen to an episode where they were talking about Heather and the Sunshine Summit and all the places she's been. But I get why people listen to this show instead of others, because it's like a podcast about podcasting comedy show. These guys clown around and joke, and they deliver a lot of podcast industry news. They deliver a lot of information and good information, but they're funny as hell. And I said, when I talked about Dave Jackson, it's like, Dave Jackson is a funny guy, but Dave Jackson is a funny guy in that he's just got a way of delivering a line or telling a story that'll make you laugh. Whereas Steven and SP crack jokes and burn each other, and they kind of bust each other's bit. But all while delivering legit, really solid podcasting information and news and tech advice and things like that. But it's all focused on the hobby podcaster, like me, like just about everybody that's going to be in as part of the Sunshine Summit. We're all, for the most part, we're all hobby podcasters. Some of them make money. Emily from The Story Behind, she spun off. She has a production business now, but but ultimately her show is a hobby. And like so many others, I mean, and the rest of the guys were hobbyists, and that's who their show is focused at. Whereas a lot of the other podcasting shows are focused, they're much wider net. They'll talk about, the people who do this as a business. The Audacity of Podcast and School of Podcasting. It's like they have clients and they talk to the guy who's starting a podcast to market his real estate business or whatever. They talk to that guy too. But it really, to me, it seems like Better Podcasting, and they outright say it's for the hobbyist. It's for the people that, for the most part, they're not making money on their show. They're probably losing money. But they do it because they love it. That's why we do this. I get why people would listen to it. They're funny. That's just it. It's like they have a show about podcasting that's fun to listen to. You learn a bunch of stuff, but you also have fun. They're just it's a fun show. And they are part of the Gonna Geek network at gonnageek.com. I feel like I have to keep spelling things. Gonna, GONNAGEEK, gonnageek.com.